okay? Cut it so that it's in the clipboard, okay? So in other words, Control X you could do, or Command X, or what have you. Just to be clear, it's environment.deliberative to random, quote, infection. We're going to take that and we're going to put it somewhere else, okay? We're not going to have it sent immediately, okay? Boom. Now I'd like you to take a button over. So we're going to add a button now. A button's a control also. We've added several controls now. We've added sliders, we've added text boxes, now we're adding buttons, okay? So I'd like you to drag a button over from control, and we're going to call it button seed new infection, or button, new infection, or what have you. And the action is going to be the code that used to be in that startup. The action is just going to tell the environment, hey, send a random person a message, okay? So the action associated with the button is going to be the thing that the button does when it's pushed. And by default, it's going to be enabled, so we don't have to put anything in enabled, okay? So the action here is going to be that delivered to random. Okay. So now, when you press that button, bing, 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 it should be able to seed multiple people around the model.
What do we call the button again?
I called it button seed new infection. It's actually helpful to say the type of thing before it, because then if you see a bunch of names, you can kind of have an understanding of what different things are. So like slider this, slider infection hazard versus slider population size. You get a sense of, okay, both are sliders, so that's the sort of thing they are. So I know if I want a slider, I refer to them. And then the rest kind of gives what their function is, what their jurisdiction is. Here I call button seed new infection. It's a little bit immaterial for the purposes of the subsequent slides because we don't refer to it ever. This is just a standalone thing, but generally good naming helps in remembering things. So button seed new infection. The action was the code that was previously in the startup for main. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Okay. Okay. So action associated with this code is environment.delivered to random. And so what that means is, remember, we're defining sort of behavior, we're specifying the behavior of this button. So when we run the model, when we press that button, the action will occur. We may press it once, we may press it 10 times. Each time it's going to run that action, right? Okay. So you press that button, it'll spread things around here. It may get to places it otherwise wouldn't have gotten to. Okay. So that's good. We're gonna have some more fun now. Okay. With controls. Okay, so I'd like you, this is again down main, I'd like you to add a variable, okay, from over here. And maybe there should have been a parameter. Probably arguably it should have been a parameter, but I'm calling it is reporting enabled. And if you see that is, what type do you think it is? What sort of variable is it? It's a Boolean, yeah. It's a Boolean. And its initial value is going to be false. It's going to be called is reporting enabled. This is going to throttle as to whether or not we're reporting events while they happen in the model. Maybe we only want to report things at a certain time instead of continuously, okay? So is reporting enabled. Again, maybe that should have been a parameter, since then we could have, when we created the model, we could have said what it is. So now, if we go back to person, there's this transition for infection that reports like I've been infected, right? And instead, we're going to make it gated. We're going to make it dependent on whether reporting is enabled. So instead of just saying trace ln this has been infected, instead we're going to say if this is a person, that's referring to this person, we're going to get their main, reference to their main object, and then we're going to ask is reporting enabled for that. And if so, then we're going to do this trace ln. Okay? So in other words, we're going to have this reporting depend on the value of this variable, the Boolean variable, which lives in me. Does that make sense? So in short, we're going to have the behavior of this agent, just like it depended on exposure or hazard, which lived in main. Here it's going to depend on whether or not it reports something, this epiphenomenal reporting. It's going to just depend on whether is reporting enabled. Is the reporting enabled for as reported by the main. Okay, questions on this? Does this make sense to people? Okay, remember this is a Boolean variable, and that's good because if inside of these parentheses, this is an expression, it has to evaluate to a what? And you say if, and it has to be a true or false thing, and that's a Boolean. This is either true or false. Boolean variable. It's true or false, and that allows if to say, okay, if it's true, then we're going to print this out. If it's not true, we're not going to print that out. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So that's contingent reporting. Now, after each of these changes, you might want to go up to Model and select it and do Build, just because it's going to start. If it has a problem, it's going to identify it in the problems window. Okay. And that will let you know sooner if there's a problem, rather than just accumulating hidden problems. You don't want the Big Bang strategy. You make lots of changes, and then suddenly nothing works. A whole bunch of errors. You want to see where they come, get them, zap them one at a time. Okay. So similarly for the recovery, there's something that just said trace the and so is recovered. It'll say if reporting enabled in the main is enabled, then we'll report. Okay. So this is again the expression. So as a person, I'm going to get my main object, and I'm going to ask is reporting enabled. Does that make sense? So it's the same basic expression, the exact same if around it. It's just inside of it, instead of saying has been affected, it says has recovered. Okay? Okay. So now we are going to go back to main. We're going to go back down main, and we're going to add a checkbox in. So flyer, text, but next is checkbox. Checkboxes have to do with Boolean things, true or false. So we're going to drag it in, and we're going to have it called checkbox enable reporting, and its label, the sort of visible label for it is going to be enable reporting. And we're going to have it linked to is reporting enabled. Okay? So in other words, every time it's pressed, checked, it's going to make sure that is reporting enabled is true. Every time it's not checked, it's going to make sure that is reporting enabled is false. Every time it changes check state. Does that make sense? And I think in return, if yeah, sure.
Under is reporting enabled, that variable.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it let me use a capital F for false?
Because so languages differ. There's many programming languages out there, and they differ in many ways. One of the ways in which they differ is whether they consider case as important or not. Okay, so we say whether or not something a language is case sensitive. In other words, does it consider capital P person as the same as little p person? Does it consider those to refer to the same thing? Java is case sensitive. So capital F false is not something it recognizes. Lowercase f false is something it does recognize. And you could think of it as being extra picky, but it also allows you the flexibility to have to use capitalization for very good purposes. So in Java, for classes we capitalize the first letter of it, and so if I wanted to have a reference to a person, I might declare a variable called whose type is class capital P person. I might call this variable person, like, and it's referring to some particular person. This is referring to the class that represents for push and put, the type of this thing, but this is referring to the variable. And when you look at a Java program, you come to recognize immediately, okay, this is probably a variable, and this is probably a class. And it's because it doesn't treat them as the same. So by the same token, I've got to be careful here because I don't want to say capital F, that this is not a class, but it doesn't know what that is because it treats it as different than this. And this is the name in Java for the Boolean called false. It's not true. In other words, if you had if false, else, only this guy gets ever executed, right? Because this is not true, so it doesn't do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So this, it just doesn't know what to make of it. Doesn't recognize it. It would, I don't know how to explain it too much better than that. I was recently looking for references. Chris can relate to this, I'm sure. I was recently looking for citation counts to one of my papers, and the citation counts were somewhat lower than I expected. But then I realized that it's because some of the citations had a hyphen in them, and some did not have the hyphen. And once you took both into account, it was a much larger set. But it's the same sort of thing. It's like Web of Science treats it as different whether or not it has a dash or no dash. And so here it's not treating them as the same. There's probably some good example in English like president, where we capitalize it for mean one thing and not for other meaning, but I'm not coming up with it right now. My head is still partly in China. Maybe I could come up with a Chinese example. Anyway, enable reporting. Here we added a checkbox, and this was linked to Boolean. Is reporting enabled? So this is a visible element that's going to allow us to adjust this underlying variable called is reporting enabled. Okay, so when we run this thing, the checkbox will be visible up there. And while we're running it right now, at first you should see no output. But when you click that checkbox, when you check it, you should start to see reporting here. Start to see output. Oh, okay. This is it now that by checking it, it is going to turn this true, and by turning to this true, this thing here, for example, this recovery transition, this if statement is going to be, the thing inside here is going to be true, so it's going to actually execute this little bit of code, which is going to report this, report something like this, so-and-so has recovered. Does that make sense? Okay. So in short, we have another type of control, another type of widget, which is a checkbox that is associated with Booleans. And we could use it to enable things or disable or what have you. So that's good. Okay, this is just an incidental thing, but you'll notice that that these things are all kind of mushed together here. There's kind of the visual presentation, and it's kind of occurring behind our buttons, which is a little bit disconcerting. So just in case you've ever wondered, how can you clean that up? Well, if you go to main, you can move the, so when you go to main, what you'll see is there's a circle and a line. Where does this circle and this line come from? If you go to main and you look up in that corner there at the origin, you'll see a circle and a line. Where did those come from? It's from person. And it's because of what? Like, why is that from person rather than from simulation or from deer or whatever. What is it about this that makes it care about person? What does main care about person? Why does main care about person? How does main even know about person?
So we have population.
Yeah, it's a population. So it's really, you probably folks don't remember this. It was many lectures ago now, but when we first dragged person into here, it created population and it also put this visual representation up there. Now, the fact that it would put it up at that that sort of crossroads up there, that is just its default value. That is basically telling it, okay, yes, starting at that point, left, right and down from there, display the people. That's kind of the origin of the visual representation of people. So if we want to change where people are displayed, for example, to move it out of this area visually, we could drag that down to this point. And we could then run it. This is not a particularly deep thing, but it's, it's kind of nice, so we could kind of have them separated. Now we have our various things up here that we can manipulate, prob, and change over time. And then we down here have our visual representation. Okay. So by moving that around, you could change the origin, as it were, for the visual representation of people. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Right. Okay. So I should have had a slide here that is going to transition. We're going to. So what we've been looking at thus far is controls that are supported by AnyLogic, okay? And they include the slider, the button, the checkbox. We are now going to proceed to look at the edit box and the radio buttons, okay? But we're going to do it with a different model where we look at one other sort of control. The twist is going to be that the control we're going to additionally look at is not one of those listed here, ladies and gentlemen. It's instead going to be one supported externally by Java. And I want to show you how you could break out of this kind of, the limitations of this. You'll notice file chooser here is disabled except for the professional edition. If you try to add it, I think it complains. And so I want to be able to show you how to have a file chooser because it's a really useful thing to have. And it's really easy to add if you just know a little bit about Java. So we're going to, my comments here are going to be fairly straightforward, but they have significance because they're about bringing in additional elements outside of what AnyLogic normally supports, okay? Okay, so what I'd like you to do here is, I distributed, and I should have had a transition slide here. I distributed